In today's video, we're going to make a few stamps for some of my maker friends. I always start off in Inkscape for my stamps. I import an image, either a JPEG or a bitmap, and then trace the bitmap to path. When using the bitmap to path tool, you have to play with the settings to get the best results for your image. It actually duplicates on top, so I always drag it out of the way, delete the original image, and that way I have my path image to work with. I use the select nodes tool to make sure that I have the right image and that all my paths are created, and you can tell that from all the little dots here. So to create a stamp, you're actually making a negative of the image that you want for your final result. The way I accomplish this is by creating a new layer that I put behind this one. I call it background, and on this new layer you draw a square or a circle, whatever, a shape around the image that you're trying to create the stamp out of. Take some time and get the image shaped just right, because this will be what your stamp is made out of. Then you want to take that object, turn it into a path, select both images, and then use the path exclusion setting to erase your original image from the newly drawn square, rectangle, or circle. Now in this particular image, I noticed that the wood grain pattern was a little dark. What that meant was just the stroke of each line was a little too high. So I went and changed this to a 0, I saw the white lines come in, and I knew I had a good image to make a stamp from. And once you have your image, don't forget to flip it, because remember, we're making a negative to create the stamp. I always go ahead and save the SVG in case I need to do any fine tweaking after the fact. And then after you save the SVG file, I go ahead and export it as a PNG, which is an image that doesn't have a background in place. And this is going to be with the file that I make my stamp from. Now I use a Glowforge, and I like it because of the software that comes with it. It's easy to import the image into their proprietary software, and boom, it pops up right on the screen. I use this rubber mat that I'll link down in the description. I got it from Amazon. And then Glowforge has these beta tools that let you size the image to the exact size and shape you want it. I have settings already pre-programmed for stamps. It's speed 300, power 70. And get it right in place. You can see where I'm going to carve because of the camera in the Glowforge. Get everything set up, and then walk over and press the magic button. Now I'm not an expert at wood turning. I just got this lathe. This is only the second thing I've ever made on it, but I knew I had to make handles for these stamps on the lathe. I mean, you have a new tool, you have to use it, right? So basically I took this scrap piece of oak and I just turned it down until I got a uniform round shape. After I got the oak to a pretty uniform consistency, I took a pencil and marked off where I was going to make each of my handles. I have 4 stamps, so I need to create 4 handles, and I wanted to make sure that I left room for a shaft to go into the block that I was putting on my stamp, as well as something that was kind of decorative for the handle. Then I marked each one with an XO and a dash, the X meaning this was my sacrificial part, the dash was where my actual handle was going to be, and the O was going to be the shaft that went into the stamp. I used this real narrow tool, I don't really know what the tools are all called yet, to kind of mark off the demarcations for each one, and then I just kind of went freestyle. I used the different tools that I had to create some different shapes and ended up with 4 pretty unique handles. I knew I wanted the shaft to be between 1/2 inch and 3/8, so I used these calipers to make sure I was in that range, and then I took the whole section and I cut the 4 off on the bandsaw. This is a resaw blade I had on the bandsaw, and it leaves some pretty aggressive saw marks. So I just chucked each of the knobs back up in the lathe and used some sandpaper, 110 and 220, to give them a quick sanding before going on to paint. And when I say paint, I actually use dye. So this is some ultra dye I got at Michael's, I believe. It was actually on clearance section. It's a purple color. I really liked it. It's very deep, and I like the way dye looks versus paint because it really gets into the grain of this oak. So I just poked some holes in this cardboard box top, put all my pieces in place, and gave them 2 or 3 coats with the purple dye. Now on to the stamps. So you can see I made 4 stamps here, 2 round ones, 2 kind of square, and I just cut them out of the rubber mat with a pair of scissors. You can see where the laser removed the rubber from the mat. I made 2 passes with those settings I mentioned earlier, and this was the final result. It's not perfectly clean, so I tried to remove as much of the unnecessary parts as possible. I went to my scrap bin and I found a few pieces of wood. I used walnut for the 2 square ones, and I had these glue ups from another project. These were actually cut-offs. I decided to mark center on all my pieces first, and that way I could drill the hole for the handles. I wanted to do this first so that I could sand the back of them and not worry about the rubber of the stamp being messed up. Finding center on a square piece of wood is pretty straightforward, but finding center on something that's round is a little more difficult. Luckily, I have this pretty nifty center finder for circles. I had this tool for years, had no idea what it was, and then one day somebody showed it to me, and I use it all the time now. It works like a charm. I had to decide which handle I wanted to put with which base because, again, I'm not perfect at turning, and so they weren't all the exact same size. So I wanted to use as close a drill bit as I could to make sure that the fit was snug. Now here's a little tip when trying to drill holes in hardwoods. Try to get you a brad point drill bit. Here I'm going to show you an example. I've drawn these 2 lines, and I'm going to try to drill a hole exactly on the line. This first one's with the brad pit drill bit, and you can see it's got this little point that helps bite in and make sure you stay in the center. This second hole I'm going to drill with the traditional drill bit, multi-purpose. This one's probably a metal bit, and it does look like I'm leaning a little left, but that was actually the drill bit. It just walked its way over. So then I tried to do it again, and I used a punch to maybe get me a nice little starting spot for the drill bit, and you can see it's going to do the same thing. Neither one was as accurate as the brad point drill bit, and anytime I'm trying to drill in the center of something, I always try to grab these woodworking bits. Another tip is I can hear you say, well, I don't have a wood lathe, so I can't make the handle. Well, you don't need a wood lathe. I have this box of scraps. It's got old drawer pulls in it. It's got old pieces of dowel rods, cut-offs from other projects. I could have just left the wooden block, and that would have been good enough for a handle. So don't let tool limitations stop you from doing a really cool project. I used a roundover bit on my router table to give some character and chamfer the edges on the round wooden blocks, and then on the square ones later on I finished those off with a hand plane. I'm using just CA glue or super glue to attach the rubber to the wood, and for the circle ones it was pretty easy. I just made sure that the piece was square or centered how I liked it, put the glue down, and then I put the stamp on and held it in place. You could use activator, but with the rubber, if you don't get it exactly right, at least you have a second or two to move it around. Now, Jacob's stamp gave me a lot of problems, and we'll get to those in a second, but what I'm doing here is using a pencil to outline where the stamp is not, and then I can put CA glue only where the stamp is, and you can really see the shape of the stamp as I'm putting the glue down. 2020, I've kind of been trying to work on my finishes, my finishing techniques, and I keep coming back to this walrus oil for simple projects. It's just so easy to apply. Wipe it on with this is actually an old t-shirt. It makes the wood look beautiful, really adds some charm, and I come back after with the Walrus brand wood wax. Here we are back to Native Son wood art, and you can see I had some problems here, and what basically happened was because the end didn't have any cutout on it from the laser, it was a few millimeters higher than the wood grained S. For some reason the laser just beat the hell out of it. So I tried to sand it down, and what ended up happening was I tore up these delicate letters on the Native Son. I ended up cutting that out using a chisel, and then I actually went back to my router table and removed a section here, cut out a new Native Son, or just the wood art part of the stamp, and glued it back on. And then I used this sanding disc and tried to take down the end some. This was my first attempt, and I really didn't like the way it came out, so I went ahead and made the stamp all over again. What I did this time was I separated the N and the S, and I measured them out to see the difference in thickness. It turned out to be about 1/2 millimeter, which was the same thickness as a piece of construction paper folded in half. So I ended up taking the N, gluing it on the block, and then 2 pieces of construction paper, gluing them on the block, and then I glued the S on top, and you'll see in a second, it actually came out perfectly flush. I was very happy with the results. Now onto the most nerve-wracking part, the testing. And as you can see, you can actually make out the N and the S really clear. It takes a little while for the stamps to get kind of inked up, but once I had them going, you can see the Twisted Twine Woodworking one came out great. The Langer Works ones came out great. And I'm going to link to all these guys' Instagram and YouTube pages so you can go check them out and this cool stuff that they're working on as well. And here's the final results. I'm really happy with how they came out. I see a lot of stamp projects in my future because they were a lot of fun to make. The two square ones are walnut, and the two circle ones are cherry and maple. Again, the handles were oak that I dyed with purple dye. These four makers I've spent a lot of time with on Saturdays on this Makers on Zoom having coffee call. It's always a good time, and I appreciate, especially during this lockdown, the opportunity to talk about being creative and doing creative things with other people. I hope you really enjoyed the video. I hope you go check these four folks out and see what they're up to, and I look forward to making another video for you soon. Take care.